I spent 5 years and over $1.5 million constructing a Biosafety Level 3 laboratory in my backyard. I warned my family it was a restricted zone full of federal samples, but my sister only saw a free, glowing backdrop for her wedding. She cut the locks and disabled the air filtration for better lighting, turning her special day into a national quarantine nightmare that brought the FBI to our doorstep before the vows were even exchanged. My name is Dr. Mallory. At 32, I have achieved more in the field of plant microbiology than most do in a lifetime. I built Helix. It cost me every cent I had, roughly $1.5 million. It sits on the back acre of my property, a gleaming fortress of glass and steel. To the untrained eye, it looks like a high-end conservatory. To the federal government, it is a Biosafety Level 3 facility. It operates under negative pressure to ensure that nothing inside gets out. The air is scrubbed through HEPA filters every 2 minutes. Inside, I cultivate genetically modified flora that could revolutionize medicine or, if mishandled, trigger a localized ecological collapse. I like it there. It is quiet. Plants do not speak, and they certainly do not whine. Then came the announcement. My sister, Tiffany, got engaged to a real estate developer named Chad. Chad was wealthy on paper, but notoriously cheap in practice. I expected an invitation to a banquet hall. Instead, Tiffany showed up at my door the week after the proposal, her eyes scanning my property like a conquistador. She did not ask about my research. She did not ask how I was doing. She walked straight to the back window and pointed at Helix. "Oh my God, Mallory," she squealed, clapping her hands. The lighting. It's purple. It matches my bridesmaid dresses perfectly. We are totally having the reception there. I stared at her, blinking slowly. The purple hue came from high-intensity ultraviolet grow lights designed to accelerate mutation rates in fungal spores. "No," I said simply. "That is a laboratory. Tiffany, it is not a party venue. There are pathogens in there that require federal clearance to handle." "You are such a drama queen," she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just plants. We just need it for the photos and the cocktail hour. Chad says venues are charging $50,000 for that kind of lighting. You can save us a fortune." My parents, the Vances, arrived shortly after to reinforce the assault. They sat in my living room, looking at me with that familiar mix of disappointment and expectation. "Mallory, be reasonable," my mother said, sipping the tea I had reluctantly served. "Your sister deserves a fairy tale. You have that giant glass house just sitting there. Why must you be so selfish?" I went to my office and retrieved a binder thick with documents. I slammed it onto the coffee table. "This is a compliance agreement with the United States Department of Agriculture," I told them, my voice steady. "If an unauthorized person enters Helix, I lose my license. If a sample is compromised, I go to federal prison. This isn't about being selfish. It is about national security and safety protocols." My father rolled his eyes. Always the scientist. He grumbled. "You think you're so smart with your degrees. It's a wedding. Mallory, nobody's going to arrest you for letting family look at some flowers." They did not listen. They never listened. To them. My career was a cute little hobby that I took too seriously. The next day, I paid a contractor $4,000 to install a biometric lock on the main airlock door. It required a retina scan and a fingerprint. I also reinforced the perimeter fence. When I told Tiffany, she looked at me with pure venom. "You are just jealous," she spat. "You're a bitter old maid who cares more about weeds than her own sister's happiness. Fine. Keep your stupid lab. We didn't want it anyway. I thought that was the end of it." 3 days before the wedding, I received a summons to Washington, D.C. to defend my grant proposal before a review board. It was terrible timing, but I could not refuse. I packed my bags, feeling a sense of relief. I would be hundreds of miles away while Tiffany and her circus took over the local country club, or wherever they had decided to go. I checked the security feed on my phone one last time before boarding my flight. The indicator light on the app was green. Helix was sealed. Safe. Good luck with the wedding, I whispered to the empty house as I locked the front door. I had no idea that back in town, my mother was already looking up the number for a locksmith. Washington, D.C. was gray and raining. I sat in a conference room, listening to a panelist drone on about funding allocations. My phone sat face down on the table. Every few minutes, I tapped the screen to check the security status of Helix. Green, locked, secure. I told myself I was being paranoid. The biometric scanner was military grade. Unless my family had suddenly acquired the skills of international spies, they were not getting in. But 300 miles away, paranoia would have been the correct response. I later learned that while I was sipping lukewarm coffee, my mother and Tiffany were standing in my backyard with a heavy-set locksmith who did not ask for identification. They spun him a tale about a lost keycard and a frantic bride. For $300 cash, he drilled through the casing of my $4,000 lock. He bypassed the electronic failsafe in under 10 minutes. The heavy steel door swung open. Tiffany stepped inside and gasped. "See, I told you it was perfect," she declared. The interior of Helix was bathed in an eerie, bioluminescent violet glow. To my sister, it was a magical garden. To me, it was the visible marker of genetic instability in nightshade variants. She twirled in the center of the room, her heels clicking on the sanitizable epoxy floor. "It is a little loud, though," Tiffany complained. Frowning at the ceiling, the industrial HVAC system was roaring. It had to. It cycled the air continuously to keep the negative pressure stable and filter out contaminants. "I can't hear my vows over this jet engine," she whined. "Dad, fix it." My father, eager to be the hero and save money on a generator or technician, found the main breaker panel on the exterior wall. He did not know what the labels meant, but he knew what an off switch looked like. He pulled the master lever for the environmental control system. The hum died instantly. The fans stopped. The air inside Helix became still and stagnant. In D.C. My phone vibrated. A notification flashed across the screen. Connection lost. Server unreachable. I frowned and tapped the app. It refused to refresh. I checked the weather report for my hometown. A severe thunderstorm watch was in effect. I let out a breath and put the phone away. It was just a power outage caused by the storm. The backup generators would kick in for the freezers, but the Wi-Fi router often took a while to reset. It was fine. I told myself it was fine. Back at Helix, the silence was interpreted as victory. The wedding planners swarmed in. They carried heavy round tables and gold Chiavari chairs, dragging them across the floor. They stomped over the yellow tape marking the sterile zones. They pushed aside racking units holding Petri dishes to make room for the dance floor. "Get rid of those ugly signs," Tiffany ordered, pointing to the bright red triangles on the containment hoods. "The ones that say, 'Biohazard,' a worker asked." "Yes." They clash with the floral arrangements. "Take them down." The workers peeled off the warnings mandated by federal law and tossed them into a trash bag. The space was transforming from a high-security research facility into a Pinterest board. In the chaos, a catering waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes backed into a lab bench. His elbow knocked over a rack of test tubes. One of them shattered on the floor. It contained a concentrated suspension of fungal spores I had been modifying for drought resistance. The waiter looked around. No one saw him. He grabbed a napkin, wiped the shards and the powdery residue into his hand, and brushed it all under a metal cabinet. He thought it was just dirt. He did not know he had just released millions of microscopic, modified particles into a sealed room with no ventilation. I stepped out of the conference room for a break. I dialed my father. Voicemail? I dialed my mother. Voicemail. I dialed Tiffany. It rang and rang, then cut to her cheerful greeting. Something cold settled in my stomach. The silence from the app was one thing. The silence from the family was another. I looked at the flight board. There was a flight leaving in 2 hours. I did not care about the grant anymore. I grabbed my briefcase and ran for a taxi. By the time the wheels of my plane hit the tarmac, 200 people were crammed inside Helix. The structure was designed to hold a maximum of 4 researchers in full protective gear, not a crowd of sweating wedding guests in tuxedos and polyester gowns. Because my father had cut the power to the ventilation system to stop the noise, the air circulation had ceased completely. The greenhouse effect was working efficiently. The temperature inside the glass walls was climbing past 85 degrees, and the humidity was rising with every breath the guests took. It was the perfect incubator. I turned on my phone the second the flight attendant gave the all clear. The main server was still offline, but the backup battery for the emergency surveillance system had finally kicked in. I pulled up the feed and felt the blood drain from my face. On the screen, the wedding looked like a suffocated carnival. People were fanning themselves with programs, but I switched the camera view to the particle density sensor. The screen shifted from color to a stark monochromatic display, highlighting airborne particulate matter. I stopped breathing. A massive, swirling cloud of organic matter was pulsing through the room. To the naked eye, it was invisible. To my sensors, it looked like a thick, living fog. The spores from the broken vial were not just floating, they were multiplying rapidly in the heat, feeding off the carbon dioxide-heavy air. I did not call the local police. They would just send a patrol car and walk right into the hot zone. I dialed the emergency hotline for the Federal Select Agent Program and the CDC. "This is Dr. Mallory Vance," I said, my voice shaking as I sprinted through the terminal. "I am declaring a Biosafety Level 3 breach at my private facility. Code red. Unauthorized civilians are trapped inside with a mutated Aspergillus strain. I need immediate containment." "Repeat, code red," the operator asked, her tone shifting instantly from bored to alert. "Code red." I screamed into the phone as I reached my car. "Send the hazmat team." Now I threw my bag in the passenger seat and tore out of the parking garage. I drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic, watching the nightmare unfold on my propped-up phone screen. Inside Helix, Tiffany was standing at the altar, beaming at Chad. She looked ridiculous. Her dress, a $10,000 explosion of lace and tulle, was sweeping across the floor. I watched in horror as the hem dragged directly over the spot where the waiter had swept the broken culture. The fabric acted like a wick, soaking up the concentrated chemical and spore residue. Then, the first reaction hit. A bridesmaid near the front started scratching her neck. Then she sneezed. It wasn't a polite sneeze. It was a violent, body-shaking convulsion. Within seconds, others joined in. It's just the pollen." Tiffany laughed nervously, though she scratched at her bare arms. "Everyone, please, focus on me." But they could not. A man in the second row collapsed out of his chair, clawing at his throat. The rashes appeared almost instantly, angry red welts blooming on their skin like fast-motion flowers. The genetically modified spores were aggressive, designed to penetrate tough plant cellulose, so human skin offered no resistance at all. Panic rippled through the crowd. The coughing became a deafening roar, drowning out the string quartet. Guests began to shove each other, stumbling toward the glass doors. "What is happening?" I heard my mother shriek over the audio feed. My face is burning. I was 5 minutes away. I floored the accelerator, the engine screaming. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I had programmed the fail-safes myself. The sensors inside Helix detected the particulate concentration hitting the critical toxicity threshold. The system interpreted this not as a wedding, but as a catastrophic biological leak that threatened the outside world. On my screen, a flashing red banner appeared. "Containment protocol activated." "No," I whispered. At the venue, the heavy steel security bolts slammed into place with a sound like a gunshot. Thud, thud, thud. Every exit was instantly sealed. The 200 guests were not just sick, they were now prisoners in a contaminated box. They threw themselves against the glass, but the reinforced panes were built to withstand hurricane-force winds. They were trapped. The grow lights cut out instantly, replaced by the rotating crimson glare of the emergency strobes. The acoustic alarm, designed to pierce through industrial earplugs, began to shriek. It was a deafening, oscillating wail that brought immediate chaos to the wedding reception. 200 guests scrambled toward the exits like frightened cattle. They slammed their fists and bodies against the doors, pushing and shoving in a blind panic. But the security protocols were absolute. The 10-centimeter solid steel deadbolts had engaged the moment the sensors tripped. The doors were not just locked, they were sealed shut to prevent a biological breach. I watched the nightmare unfold on my phone as I sped down the final stretch of road toward my house. Tiffany spotted the surveillance camera lens in the corner of the room. She stormed over to it, her face distorted by the red light and sheer rage. "Open this door, Mallory," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the lens. "I know you are doing this. You are ruining my day on purpose. Open it, or I swear to God, I will kill you." She actually thought this was a prank. She believed the blistering rash spreading across her chest and the suffocating heat were part of some twisted sibling revenge plot. My parents were less vocal, but more destructive. My father grabbed a heavy metal chair and swung it with all his might against the glass wall. The chair bounced off with a dull thud, vibrating his arms violently, but the pain did not even crack. I had spent extra money on impact-resistant polycarbonate laminates. The glass was meant to keep tornadoes out, so it easily kept my father in. The air inside was getting heavy. With the ventilation killed and the heat rising, oxygen levels were dropping, and the concentration of spores was becoming critical. Above me, the rhythmic thwump, thwump, thwump of rotor blades tore through the overcast sky. A black helicopter with federal markings banked low over my property, kicking up dust and debris. Blue and red lights flashed at the end of my driveway. I screeched to a halt at my own gate. A military Humvee was blocking the entrance. Men in fatigues with assault rifles raised their hands, signaling me to stop. I jumped out of the car, hands up. "I am Dr. Mallory Vance," I shouted over the noise of the chopper. "I own this property. I am the lead researcher." A soldier grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the barricade. A man in a dark suit, the incident commander, stepped forward, his face grim. "Report!" he barked. "Biosafety Level 3 facility." I rattled off, my voice trembling but my training taking over. Negative pressure compromised. Ventilation disabled manually. Potential release of modified Aspergillus spores. High allergen risk. Neurotoxic potential in high concentrations. "Civilians, 200, I said, the number tasting like bile, trapped inside." I looked back at the screen. Inside the lab, the situation had gone from panic to a medical emergency. Chad, the groom, was clutching his throat. His face was purple and swollen beyond recognition. He stumbled and fell backward into the dessert table, sending tiers of cupcakes flying before collapsing to the floor. Tiffany shrieked. She dropped to her knees. But instead of helping him, she pulled out her phone. She started a live stream. I could see the notification pop up on my own phone. "Tiffany is live." My sister locked us in. She sobbed into the camera, tilting the angle so her followers could see Chad gasping for air on the floor behind her. "She is jealous. She is trying to kill us all. Look at us. We are dying in here." Mallory Vance is a murderer. Thousands of hearts and angry react emojis flew across the screen. She was framing her own negligence as an assassination attempt to a global audience. "We have to breach," the commander said into his radio. "Hazmat Team Alpha, go, go, go." A heavy armored truck smashed through my pristine hedges, crushing the rose bushes I had planted with my grandmother. 6 figures emerged from the back. They looked like yellow aliens, encased in fully pressurized protective suits with self-contained breathing apparatuses. They carried heavy hydraulic tools and canisters of decontamination foam. I watched them march toward the glass fortress I had built to save the world, preparing to tear it open to save my family from their own stupidity. The red light inside pulsed like a failing heartbeat, illuminating the terror on 200 faces as the yellow monsters approached the glass. The hydraulic spreaders cracked the steel seal with a groan of tortured metal. The doors swung open. The guests surged forward, lungs burning, expecting fresh air and sympathy. Instead, they were met by a wall of high-pressure nozzles. The hazmat team did not ask if they were injured. They did not offer water or blankets. They treated the wedding party exactly as protocol, dictated as a mobile biological containment breach. Thick, viscous decontamination foam was blasted directly into the faces of the crowd. I stood next to the incident commander on the perimeter, watching the scene unfold with the detachment of a researcher observing a petri dish. Tiffany emerged first, dragging Chad. She was screaming, her mouth wide open in protest. A soldier stepped forward and directed the hose at her. The chemical agent hit her $10,000 custom gown, turning the delicate white silk into a heavy, sodden mess of neon orange sludge. The force of the spray knocked her backward. Her makeup ran in dark streaks down her face, mixing with the foam, and the diamond tiara she had insisted on wearing slipped off her head and landed in the mud. Move to the staging area," a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "There was no negotiation." The guests, shivering, coughing, and covered in orange foam, were herded like livestock toward the white quarantine tents that were rapidly inflating on my front lawn. My meticulously landscaped garden was now a federal triage center. Men in Tyvek suits stripped the guests of their contaminated clothing. Elderly aunts and wealthy business partners were forced to stand in their undergarments while medical personnel swabbed their skin and took blood samples. It was clinically efficient. It was completely dehumanizing. "Dr. Vance," the commander said, handing me a clipboard. "We are sealing the lab. Protocol dictates the immediate seizure and incineration of all biological materials on site. We cannot risk a secondary outbreak or further contamination." I looked at Helix. Men were already carrying out the cryo tanks and the sample trays. 5 years of work, my drought-resistant strains, my proprietary genetic mapping. All of it was being loaded into hazardous waste trucks to be burned. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a phantom pain where my career used to be, but my face remained a mask of stone. "I understand," I said. My parents were escorted out of the crowd. They were wet, shivering and furious. When they saw me standing behind the barricade, clean and dry, their shock turned to violence. My mother lunged, her hand raised to strike me. "You devil," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did this to us, you—" She never made contact. 2 soldiers grabbed her arms and restrained her effortlessly. My father tried to step in, shouting about suing the government for assault, but he was zip-tied before he could finish his sentence. "Subjects are hostile," one soldier reported into his radio. The federal agent approached me with another document. "We have determined this was a willful breach of a federally regulated Biosafety Level 3 facility. We need you to sign this affidavit confirming you did not authorize their entry." I took the pen. The document was titled "Unauthorized Entry and Sabotage of National Bioassets." I looked at my sister, who was currently vomiting into a yellow biohazard bag while a nurse in a protective suit held her hair. I looked at my parents, struggling in the grip of the military police. Then I looked at the empty shell of Helix. I signed my name, Mallory Vance, Ph.D. "They broke in," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "They cut the locks and disabled the safety systems. I want that on the record." By evening, news helicopters were circling overhead. The headlines were already flashing across the internet. They were not calling it the wedding of the century anymore. The bold text on the news tickers read, "The toxic wedding bride poisons hundreds in illegal lab break-in." The humiliation was absolute. I watched it all from the window of the mobile command unit, feeling nothing but the icy clarity of a scientist observing the results of a catastrophic error. The fallout was swift, brutal, and administrative. 2 days after the incident, a courier delivered a certified letter from the licensing board. My research credentials were permanently revoked. I was designated a high-risk liability simultaneously. The Department of Justice froze my assets pending a full investigation into the breach. I went from being a respected scientist with a portfolio worth nearly $2 million to a woman who could not even use her debit card to buy a carton of milk. While I was being erased from the scientific community, Tiffany was building a new brand for herself. She was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health, but a thirst for vengeance. She launched a media campaign that was nothing short of a masterpiece of manipulation. She released a series of heavily edited videos on her social media channels. In these clips, she sat on her bed, looking pale and fragile, wiping away tears. Mallory told us it was an organic vegetable greenhouse. She sobbed into the camera. She said she was growing kale and heirloom tomatoes. We had no idea. We just wanted to support her hobby. She lured us in there. She wanted to hurt us because she was jealous of my happiness. It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. But the internet did not care about the truth. The internet loved a villain. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Dark Doctor was trending. Strangers sent me messages wishing I would catch the plague I studied. I was painted as the bitter, barren spinster who tried to poison her beautiful, successful sister on her wedding day. My investors panicked. Every grant I had secured for the next 5 years was pulled. The university where I held an adjunct position fired me via email. I was facing bankruptcy, lawsuit liabilities, and total professional annihilation. My parents added the final blow. They tracked me down to the cheap motel where I was hiding. They did not come to ask how I was coping. They came with demands. "You have to sell the land," my father said, standing in the doorway of my cramped room. "Chad's family is threatening to sue us for emotional distress. They want $500,000. You need to liquidate the property and pay them. It is the least you can do after ruining everything. I warned you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I showed you the documents. Nobody cares about your papers." "Mallory," my mother shouted, "look at your sister. She is traumatized. You are going to fix this, or you are no daughter of ours." They left me there, staring at the peeling wallpaper. I felt entirely broken. The world had turned upside down. Truth was a lie, and the victim was the perpetrator. I closed the blinds and lay in the dark, waiting for the inevitable eviction notice. Then my burner phone rang. I almost did not answer it. I assumed it was another reporter or a lawyer serving me papers. But the area code was from the Capitol. I picked it up. Dr. Vance. A deep, calm voice said, "Do not hang up. My name is Marcus Sterling. I am an attorney specializing in intellectual property and federal security litigation. I have no money," I said flatly, "and I have no assets. You are wasting your time. I am not looking for a retainer." Marcus replied, "I am looking for justice. I have been watching the footage your sister posted, the unedited versions that were archived before she cut them." I sat up. "What your sister is very good at editing," Marcus continued, "but she is very bad at scrubbing metadata, and she made a critical mistake in her live stream. She was so busy playing the victim that she forgot she filmed the initial break-in on her friend's phone earlier that day. It was in the background of her latest upload. I saw it." "What did you see?" I asked, my heart starting to beat faster. I saw her handing the cash to the locksmith. "Dr. Vance," Marcus said. "And more importantly, I heard her say something very specific to your father about the warning signs. She didn't think they were for vegetables. She knew exactly what she was doing. If you are willing to fight, I can prove she committed a federal felony on tape." Marcus Sterling's office was a study in intimidation. It was all chrome, glass, and expensive leather, located on the top floor of a building that looked down on the city like a judge on a bench. I sat across from him, watching a large monitor on the wall. My hands were folded in my lap, cold and still. We were watching the security footage from Helix. My family had destroyed the physical local servers, but they were not tech-savvy enough to realize that a BSL-3 facility automatically backs up all surveillance data to an encrypted cloud server every 15 seconds. On the screen, the image was crisp and high definition. I saw my father walk up to the environmental control panel. He did not hesitate. He yanked the lever down, killing the air filtration. Then the camera switched to the interior view. Tiffany was there, laughing. She kicked a tray of samples, my rare orchid hybrid sending the pot shattering against the wall. "Pause," Marcus said. The image froze on Tiffany's face. She looked delighted. "Now, listen to the audio," Marcus instructed. He turned up the volume. Through the speakers, my sister's voice cut through the room, loud and clear. "Screw the warning signs," she said on the recording. "She is gone. Just break the lock. I want that lighting for my entrance." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That is intent. Mallory, that is not an accident. That is not a misunderstanding about vegetables. That is willful disregard for federal safety protocols and intentional destruction of property." He looked at me with steel gray eyes. "We have enough here to not only win a civil case, but to hand this over to the federal prosecutor. They breached a containment zone." I looked down at my hands. They are my parents, Marcus, and my sister. I know they destroyed my life, but sending them to prison, I hesitated. The bond of blood was a heavy chain, even after everything they had done. Marcus did not argue. He simply opened a folder on his desk and slid a thick stack of papers toward me. "I was going to save this for later, but you need to see it now," he said softly. "This was filed this morning." I picked up the document. It was a lawsuit. Tiffany Vance versus Mallory Vance. She was suing me for $5 million. The causes of action listed were negligence, infliction of emotional distress, and defamation of character. "She is suing me?" I asked. My voice flat. "She broke into my lab, released a pathogen, and she is suing me." "She claims you set a trap," Marcus explained. "She claims you knowingly kept dangerous materials in a residential area without adequate warning, specifically to harm her on her wedding day. She wants $5 million to cover her pain and suffering." That was the moment the last ember of sisterly affection died. It was extinguished instantly, replaced by the cold, hard vacuum of absolute clarity. They did not care about me. They did not care about the truth. They wanted to strip me of everything I had left to pay for their own mistakes. "File it," I said. "File what Marcus asked." "Everything," I replied. "The countersuit, the federal report, all of it." I spent the next 3 days in a frenzy of calculation. I was no longer the mourning victim. I was a scientist compiling data. I pulled the valuation reports for the genetic lines that had been incinerated. The drought-resistant gene sequence alone was projected to be worth $6 million in licensing fees over the next decade. The bioluminescent markers were worth another $4 million to the medical imaging industry. I met with my former research partners in a coffee shop. I showed them the footage Marcus had pulled. I showed them the valuation spreadsheets. It wasn't negligence, I told them. Sliding the tablet across the table, it was sabotage. Dr. Aris, a mentor of mine who had distanced himself after the news broke, watched the video of Tiffany kicking the samples. His face went red with anger. "My God," he whispered. "She destroyed the alpha strain Mallory. We will testify. We will verify the value of this research. You are not going to lose this." While I built my war chest, Tiffany continued her victory lap on social media. She posted photos of herself looking sad but brave, captioned with vague quotes about toxic family members. She believed the court of public opinion was the only court that mattered. She thought her $5 million lawsuit would scare me into selling my land to pay her off. She had no idea that I was not just coming for an apology. I sat in Marcus's office 1 week later. The paperwork was ready. It was a counterclaim for $10 million in damages, plus punitive damages for malicious destruction of property. We were also naming the wedding planning company as co-defendants for facilitating a break-in. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, pen hovering over the signature line. "They wanted a drama," I said, picking up the pen. "Let's give them a tragedy." I signed my name with a steady hand. The game had changed. They were playing for likes and attention. I was playing for blood. The deposition room was sterile, smelling of stale coffee and lemon floor cleaner. A court reporter sat at the end of the long mahogany table, her fingers hovering over her stenotype machine. On one side sat my family and their strip mall attorney. On the other side sat Marcus and me. Tiffany was putting on the performance of her life. She was dressed in a soft pink cardigan and wore minimal makeup to accentuate her paleness. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes every time Marcus asked a question. "I just wanted to see the flowers," Tiffany whimpered, her voice trembling. Mallory never told us it was dangerous. She just said she didn't want us in there because she was mean. I had no idea. Marcus did not look up from his notepad. He waited for her to finish sniffling before he slid a document across the table. Ms. Vance, Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm. This is a sworn affidavit from Mr. Gerald Finch, the locksmith you hired. In this statement, Mr. Finch admits that you and your mother approached him and offered him $300 in cash to, and I quote, drill out the lock because the owner was out of town and being a witch. Is that correct? Tiffany froze. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically in her ear. I don't remember saying that, she stammered. Marcus turned his attention to my father. Mr. Vance, you claim you disabled the ventilation system because it was noisy. Did you see the 12 separate warning signs posted on the exterior of the building? The ones that read, danger biohazard and authorized personnel. Only. My father shifted in his seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. I thought they were, part of the decor, like a Halloween thing. Mallory is weird like that. You thought federal warning labels were decorations, Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. And when you bypassed the circuit breaker, which was taped over with red caution tape, you thought that was festive as well? My father stuttered, unable to find a lie that fit. During the lunch break, the situation went from bad to catastrophic for them. Tiffany's phone rang. It was her insurance agent. She had put the speakers on, hoping for good news about a payout for the wedding cancellation. Ms. Vance. The agent's voice was tinny but audible. We have reviewed the police report. Your policy covers accidents. It does not cover damages resulting from the commission of a crime or illegal trespassing. Your claim is denied in full. Furthermore, we are canceling your policy effective immediately. Tiffany dropped the phone, but before she could scream, the door to the conference room opened. A process server walked in. He wasn't looking for me. He walked straight to Tiffany. Tiffany Vance? He asked. Yes, she breathed. He handed her a thick envelope. You are being served. Your husband, Chad, has filed for an annulment and is suing you and your parents for fraud and reckless endangerment. He is currently hospitalized with acute respiratory distress and is holding you solely responsible. The room went silent. Then, the screaming started. Tiffany turned on our parents with the ferocity of a trapped animal. This is your fault, she shrieked at my mother. You told me it was fine. You told me Mallory was just bluffing. You said we could use the space. Now Chad is leaving me, and I am going to be broke. Don't you dare blame us, my father yelled back, his face turning beet red. You were the one who wanted the purple lights. You were the one who hired the locksmith. They were tearing each other apart. It was ugly and it was loud. I sat across from them, my hands folded on the table, my face completely expressionless. Dr. Vance, their lawyer, asked me, trying to regain control. Did you or did you not install the locks to entrap your family? No, I said. Did you warn them verbally? Yes. I offered nothing else. No emotion, no defense, just facts. Suddenly, the door opened again. This time, it was not a process server. It was a team of men in dark suits with badges on their belts. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The lead agent stepped forward. He looked at Tiffany and my father. Tiffany Vance, Robert Vance. He said, I am with the Department of Justice. We are taking over this investigation based on the evidence of forced entry and the willful destruction of federally controlled biological agents. We are filing criminal charges against you both for endangering national biosecurity and domestic terrorism related to the release of a hazardous pathogen. Tiffany stopped crying instantly. My father slumped in his chair. This was no longer a family spat or a civil lawsuit. They were looking at federal prison. The desperation of a narcissist facing consequences is a truly ugly thing to witness. 2 days before the grand jury was set to convene, my mother arrived at the door of my cramped rental apartment. She did not come with a lawyer. She came with tears, a casserole, and a lifetime of emotional manipulation tactics packed into her designer handbag. She threw herself onto the dirty welcome mat the moment I opened the door. "Mallory, please," she wailed, clutching at the hem of my jeans. "You have to stop this. He is your father. Tiffany is your baby sister. You cannot let them go to prison. They will die in there." I looked down at her. A month ago, she had called me a bitter old maid. Now, she was invoking the sacred bond of family. "We are your blood," she sobbed. "Blood is thicker than water. Mallory, how can you be so cruel?" I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the audio file Marcus had isolated from the security feed during the height of the chaos, just before the lockdown. I pressed play. My mother's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the hallway. "I don't care if she loses her license. That ungrateful little bitch deserves to lose everything. I hope she rots in Washington so we can finally enjoy this party without her sour face." The recording ended. My mother froze. Her hands dropped from my legs. "That is what blood sounds like to me," I said coldly. "Get off my porch!" The public tide turned just as violently. Marcus leaked the full, unedited security footage to a major news network. The world saw the truth. They saw my father bypassing the safety warnings. They saw Tiffany laughing as she kicked over a tray of rare genetic samples that could have helped cure famine. The internet, which had previously vilified me, now turned its collective rage on my sister. The toxic wedding became the #1 trending topic in the United States. Tiffany's sponsors, a hair vitamin company and a fast fashion brand, dropped her publicly within 3 hours of the broadcast. Her comment sections were flooded with people calling her a bioterrorist. She deleted her accounts, but the internet never forgets. Amidst this storm, I received a phone call that brought me to my knees, not in grief, but in relief. It was the head of the hazardous waste cleanup crew. "Dr. Vance," he said. "We finished clearing the main debris. We found something. The subfloor emergency vault. It held." I gasped. "What?" "The seal remained intact," he explained. "The temperature inside never fluctuated. Your core archive samples are safe. We are transporting them to a federal storage unit now." I hung up the phone and wept. The lab was gone. The money was gone. But the work, the genetic soul of my research had survived. They hadn't killed it. That knowledge lit a fire in my belly that burned hotter than any anger. I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for the future of my work. The trial date was set for the 15th of November. The entire country seemed tuned in. It was being billed as the trial of the decade. I sat in Marcus's office for our final strategy meeting. He looked tired, but confident. "They are going to try to paint you as negligent," Marcus said, pacing the room. "They will say the locks were flimsy. They will say the locksmith was tricked." He stopped and smiled, a shark-like grin that told me everything was going to be fine. "But they don't know who we have sitting in the waiting room," Marcus said. He opened the door. A man in a grease-stained work shirt sat there, looking nervous. It was the locksmith. "He didn't just drill the lock. Mallory," Marcus said softly. He kept the text messages Tiffany sent him. She didn't tell him she lost a key. She texted him explicitly, "My sister locked us out with some high-tech scanner. I will pay you double if you can break it before she gets back." I looked at the locksmith, and then I looked at Marcus. "That is premeditation," I said. "That," Marcus corrected, "is a conviction." The courtroom was stiflingly hot, packed with reporters and onlookers who treated my life like a spectator sport. The lawyer representing my family wiped sweat from his forehead. He had spent the last 2 hours trying to paint me as a reckless scientist who left dangerous weapons lying around for children to find. "Dr. Vance created a hazard," he argued, gesturing wildly. "She kept toxic substances in a residential neighborhood. My clients were simply victims of her negligence. Marcus stood up slowly. He adjusted his tie and walked to the center of the room. This was not leaving a gun on a coffee table, Marcus said, his voice booming off the mahogany walls. This was a bank vault. My client built a fortress. Your clients did not stumble in. They besieged it. Then came the final blow. Marcus submitted the data logs from the facility's black box, which had been recovered from the hard drive safe. Your Honor, Marcus said. At 11:42 in the morning, the system records a manual override of the fire suppression system. The defense claims this was accidental. However, the internal atmospheric sensors detected a spike in particulate matter immediately after. He paused for effect. Tobacco smoke, Marcus clarified. Mr. Vance disabled the fire alarm specifically so he could smoke a cigar inside a Biosafety Level 3 laboratory. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate dismantling of federal safety equipment for personal leisure. A gasp went through the gallery. My father shrank into his seat, his face draining of color. The narrative of the innocent, confused old man evaporated instantly. The judge did not deliberate long. Her face was stern as she read the verdict. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Mallory Vance, she declared, the defendants engaged in gross negligence and willful destruction of property. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like liberation. The judgment was brutal. The court ordered my family to pay $1.5 million in reconstruction costs and an additional $3 million in intellectual property damages. They did not have $4.5 million because they could not pay. The court ordered the immediate asset seizure and liquidation of their estates. My parents' house, the home where I grew up and where they had belittled me for decades, was seized by the bank. Tiffany's luxury apartment in the city was confiscated. The criminal sentencing was the cherry on top. The judge looked at Tiffany and my father with undisguised disdain. You treated a national security issue like a party venue, she scolded. I sentence you both to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Specifically, you will be assigned to the state's hazardous waste cleanup detail. Since you like playing with toxins, you can spend your weekends cleaning them up. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of Helix 2.0. I had used the settlement money to buy a massive plot of land 50 miles from the nearest town. My new lab was state-of-the-art, double the size of the first one, and surrounded by a 12-foot electric fence. I checked my tablet. The security feed showed the front of my parents' old house. A sold sign stood on the lawn. I watched as the movers carried out the last of their furniture. My mother was crying on the curb. My father sat on a suitcase, looking old and defeated. They were moving into a small, rented 2-bedroom apartment across town. I felt no guilt. I felt only a profound, quiet peace. I turned back to my work. On the sterile table in front of me, inside a sealed glass chamber, a single green shoot was pushing up through the soil. It was the only survivor of the alpha strain, recovered from the vault. It had endured the heat, the darkness, and the destruction. And now, against all odds, it was growing again, just like me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your city or country so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, Mirror Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people. See you in the next story.